In this video, I'm going to give you 3 tips to boost your open-mindedness so you can think more critically and have greater influence. And that's coming right up. My name is Christopher Cluse. Welcome to the Philosophical Life. This is a channel designed to help you think sharper and go deeper so you can ultimately live smarter. If this is your first time here, consider subscribing to the channel and clicking on the bell icon below so that you can get notified when any new videos launch. Stick around until the end of the video to receive a bonus tip on how to boost your open-mindedness. Now, before diving into the 3 tips, we first need to figure out what is an intellectual virtue. An intellectual virtue is a habit or a skill. A habit or a skill, that's not the whole thing. It's a habit or a skill that tends to produce true beliefs or understanding. Intellectual virtues include things like humility, being humble and admitting that you don't know everything. Courage, being willing to take risks intellectually. And perseverance, being willing to be gritty and keep on pursuing an answer to a problem. Now, with that in mind, what is open-mindedness as an intellectual virtue? Well, roughly speaking, open-mindedness is the skill or habit that inclines you to consider alternative possibilities. Let's consider the 3 tips for boosting your open-mindedness. The first tip is to swallow your pride. So, an example that illustrates open-mindedness and swallowing your pride is a story about Abraham Lincoln. So, Abraham Lincoln had a subordinate named Stanton. And Stanton had challenged a lot of Lincoln's handling of the Civil War. And at that time, the United States was in some sense crumbling before Lincoln's eyes. Now, you may think that ultimately Lincoln would require Stanton to get in line with his ideas and his approach to the way he was handling and going forward with the country. But Stanton challenged his ideas. He was ultimately insubordinate. Now, President Lincoln, as the President of the United States, had every right to not listen to Stanton, to even punish him, get him out of his office. But instead, Lincoln assumed Stanton might be right. He at least was willing to entertain the possibility that some of Stanton's ideas would benefit Lincoln. So Lincoln actually went to Stanton, agreed with him on a position, and that actually changed the way Lincoln approached things and really benefited resolving, coming out of the Civil War. So, oftentimes we are in a position of authority. We may be at a job and we have people who report to us, and the inclination there is to think that because you occupy a certain position or have some authority or power, that the people below you need to really heed your ideas, but maybe you don't have as much to learn from them. Well, developing the disposition to be open-mindedness involves swallowing your pride and saying, you know what? Even though I'm in authority over them and I don't necessarily have to listen to them, I'm going to choose to listen to their ideas. I'm going to be open that they could change my mind. And so, the first tip is swallow your pride. Tip number 2 is to consider alternative hypotheses. Hypotheses are things that scientists use as assumptions to either confirm or disconfirm with experiments and data. An example of open-mindedness by considering alternative hypotheses is Marie Curie. When she discovered radium, she came to several points in her research where she could have just thrown up her hands and given up. Instead, what she did is she went back to the drawing board, reformulated her hypotheses, and allowed the data to guide her toward new possibilities, which ultimately ended up in her finding a new element. You can think about your beliefs as being hypotheses. These beliefs might include controversial and important issues. So, for instance, if you believe that more gun laws should be enacted as a way to reduce violent crime, then you want to stay open to the possibility that an alternative hypothesis better explains the data regarding violent crime. For instance, you might get into the data and discover that it isn't actually gun laws being too lax that leads to violent crime using guns. It's actually the need for greater enforcement of the laws that already exist. This is just an example, but you can see how the open-minded person doesn't stay fixated on their prior belief or hypothesis. Instead, they remain open to letting the data lead them to potentially a new belief. So, tip number 2 is be willing to consider alternative hypotheses. Tip number 3 to boost your open-mindedness is to actively seek out alternative viewpoints on important issues. To give you a tool for doing this, I'm going to introduce you to a website that is great. It gives you an opportunity to look at pro and con on important issues. So here we're jumping into my screen. As you can see, this website is called procon.org. It's a great resource for getting a quick snapshot of how people argue pro and con on certain important issues. So as you can see, under most popular, one of the issues actually is gun control. So if we click on that link, this will take us to the main question: should more gun control laws be enacted? Now, you can actually scroll down and see listed out pro and con for the proposition that more gun control laws should be enacted. An open-minded person would actually seek out the opposite side of the issue from the side they're either naturally inclined to believe or that they already had a firm conviction on. This brings up an important point about open-mindedness, namely that open-mindedness can coincide with firm conviction about an issue. So, for instance, I might be on the pro side and say, I agree that more gun control laws should be enacted because, for instance, if we look at pro number 1, the Second Amendment is not an unlimited right to own guns. So there's some limits to the right to own guns, and so it isn't just a carte blanche protection against individuals owning guns. So an open-minded person would not consider pro 1, this first pro, for that proposition. Instead, they would actively seek out the other side. What does the other side believe? Well, the other side, con 1, is that the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution protects individual gun ownership. So that cuts against the idea that more gun laws should be enacted because the Constitution provides certain protection for gun ownership. And this website is great because it gives you some of the stats, including some of the legal briefings that actually resulted in and support the main point in the con and pro and con category. So I commend you to this site to actually practice being open-minded. So tip number 3, again, is to actively seek out the opposing side to the side you're naturally inclined to believe. So tip number 4, or the bonus tip, is to actually actively work on diminishing your biases. This can come from just being aware in certain situations where you're inclined to get frustrated when another person is giving an alternative viewpoint to the one you hold. They might be arguing for the other side and you're just getting frustrated and frustrated and frustrated. Well, that's an opportunity to exercise your awareness that certain biases may be creeping in. You're unwilling to really give their viewpoint a fair hearing because you tend to just want to confirm what you already believe. And when this other viewpoint's presented, it creates friction and cognitive dissonance. So tip number 4 is to check your cognitive biases at the door. I hope this video has been helpful. It's provided you 3 main ways to boost your open-mindedness, which ultimately is going to help you become a better critical thinker and have more influence because people respect you as a thinker. Lastly, go ahead and subscribe to The Philosophical Life if you like this video and want to receive more videos like this. And you can click on the card to access another video that's related to this one. I look forward to more discussions that are philosophical. I look forward to more so helping you go deeper, think sharper, and ultimately live smarter.